Welcome back to another video on Three Amigos Outdoors, and today we're going to be sharpening knives. That being said, let's get into it. Alrighty, so today we're going to be learning about knife sharpening, and there's a few different tools you can use, one of which I'm holding right here, which is a whetstone. There's also another one, which is a pull-through sharpener, which you hold it like this and you pull your blade through. I'm probably not going to be using this one today because, well, I don't have any blades that are damaged enough to need the coarse side or the fine side of the pull-through. Mostly it's just going to be some tuning up and stone work, but I might be able to find another knife to use that. So also another thing you need to do with this knife, or with this stone here, is this stone's a whetstone, and it needs to be wetted in a pot of water so it will not clog itself up, which is basically just metal getting into the stone and losing its effectiveness to sharpen your blades. And it's kind of a cool process, so I'm going to let you watch right here. Alright, after this thing has been soaking in water for a few minutes, or until it does not soak up any more water, you have to take it out, of course, to use it. And this stone, it's a softer type of stone instead of a hard stone. It's a softer stone used for knife sharpening. And I kind of like a softer stone, but there is one bad thing about them, is they're prone to damage. So every once and again, I don't know if you can see or not, but in here, there's a little bit of damage, this little mark right here, because steel's so hard it can cut right into these stones really easy. So we have this rock right here, which is basically a resurfacing stone, and it's used to just rub across the surface of this to make it more flat and more of an even surface. So all you gotta do is put this in water for also another second and just let it soak in there for about 5 to 10 seconds. Once it's nice and wet, you get this one wet and you rub them across each other. And this process right here is basically just like sandpaper. It's going to rub out the damage, and it's going to make it more flat so that we have a more even surface to work with when we're using the stone, and so we don't have irregularities in the final product, which is our knife. You see all the material coming off here. It's much more flat after a few seconds because the stone is soft, and you see a lot of material just came off. So it's really important to do that, otherwise you can run into problems. You can cause irregularities, you can cause burrs, and all that stuff right there that I just said can cause actually more damage than good to your stone. So keep that in mind. Alright, so here is a throwing knife. It's going to be the first knife we're going to sharpen here. I like it for a first knife and a practice knife because it's really, it's a uniform blade. It's fairly flat. It doesn't have a piece of metal right here that blocks you and basically chips up your stone on the edges, but you see it's a little chipped up if you can see that. And it's just an overall really easy blade to sharpen and practice with, so that's why I like them. And you can put your finger in here to sharpen it. So how we're going to sharpen this is, first we're going to take a pass through right here, start at the tip, and rub it down the blade, and then come back. And just basically you're going to want to repeat that process a bunch more, so I'll speed it up for you. Also, another thing you need to do once this stone gets a little metal on it is you're going to want to go back to your water pot over here and rinse it off to prevent any clogs and any other unnecessary materials on your stone, because again, it can cause unwanted side effects. So two things I forgot to say earlier were that this stone, it is very soft and porous, but I forgot to say it's grit. This is a 5,000, 10,000 grit stone right here, and it's really useful because 5,000 will do most of your like tuning, and then 10,000 does your polishing and edging. And the other thing I forgot to say was you have to do this to both sides, obviously. I want to make it obvious. So after we finish that side, there, we flip the blade over and you go to the next side and basically just do the same thing. You want to keep the knife at a kind of a shallow angle depending on the blade type. This right here is a thick blade knife, or a much thicker blade, like rather than a fillet knife. So you're going to want to make the angle a little greater because there's more material there. And just rub back and forth, keeping it about a 20-25 degree angle, so we make this blade real sharp. So moving on to the back, we're going to do the same thing we did on the first side to the second side because it's a finer grit. This is going to take this knife and basically polish the edge a little. You're not going to be able to see much surface difference, but there is a difference. It does make it sharper, and basically it just pulls out any microscopic burrs out of it. And then you can go over on a belt or your clothing or something and rub the blade on your clothing like this to not hurt yourself. But that'll also, since I'm wearing a microfiber shirt, it'll expose any burrs that are on the blade still. So that's a good point. Another thing I kind of forgot to mention earlier was that this is going to make kind of a mess because you're using water and a big rock and a piece of metal. So it's going to make a little bit of a mess when you're doing this. So make sure to do it somewhere like outside, or have a rag handy just so you can wipe up the water if you're doing it inside, because it'll make a little bit of a mess. Alright, our second type of knife is a large hunting knife. And they're a little bit harder to sharpen. One, because of the general size of the blade, and two, because it has this little piece of metal right here. And for the stone, that's not the stone's friend, because this piece of metal, as you're rubbing back on it or rubbing forward, this edge right here is going to catch that stone, and it's going to cause basically it to make a chip in the stone. You see I already have a few chips in here, like this one. It happens every so often once you take one of these and hit it against here, because the stone's so soft it doesn't give. So it's going to basically chip the stone and damage it, and you kind of want to keep that from happening because, well, these aren't exactly free, so you're going to have to buy more if they get too chipped or have too much damage from extensive use. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to sharpen something, because you don't want to damage your knife, you don't want to damage your stone. So with a little bit of precaution, you can keep both of those from happening. Alright, same thing with this big thing, this big knife. The same concept as these. You start at the tip here, and you just kind of run down the blade. And do the same thing on the opposite side. Again, this is also a thicker blade knife, and you're going to want to have a wider angle to follow the angle of the blade that it's already set at, which is usually about 20 to 25 degrees. And that's to keep your best result, because if you make it too shallow, you're basically going to be dulling the blade. If it's too deep, you're going to be damaging the blade itself, and that you would need either a very coarse stone or a belt sander to pull that out. So we don't want to cause that. And this knife's already sharp, so I'm really not going to spend that much time on it. So it's just kind of an example for y'all to see. Alright, so one thing you can do to check if your knife is sharp is run your thumb against it like this, not against the blade, but the opposite direction of the blade. And you can rub it against it a little bit, but be careful to not cut yourself, because sometimes if you sharpen your knives like this, they'll get really sharp. And another thing you can do to check for damage, if you have longer fingernails and you don't want to, and you are kind of comfortable with a knife, is run your fingernail down it. And if you can cleanly run it down there, your knife probably is pretty sharp because there's no damage in it. And running your fingernail down it is a great way to find damage, because if you find damage, your fingernail is going to go like this and it's just going to stop, because it'll hit it like a nick in the blade or something. So that's a good way to find damage, especially if you can't see it very well, because these knives, like a little piece of damage, it acts like a serrated knife, and that's no good for a solid blade knife, because then, especially if you cut yourself, because it's going to go right into you. And then if you try to pull it out, it's just going to tear your skin and meat and all that stuff. It's going to tear you up. So it's just not good. And of course, having a clean blade means you can cut things with less force, and you don't have to worry about cutting yourself because you're using too much force. You're cutting down. And then if you're using a dull blade, a dull blade is going to hit you. It may not cut you like very deep, but if it does cut you, the knife could be dirty. It could go into you like a serrated edge, as I said earlier, and cause a lot more damage than a sharp knife would. If a sharp knife cuts you, it's not likely to be as hard because you're probably not using as much force, and it's going to cut you, and it's not really going to hurt. Granted, it's going to leave a slicing wound in you, but it's not going to hurt that bad, especially if you're cutting your finger or something. Countless times I've taken my pocket knives, because I sharpen them like with this stone regularly, and I'll go right through something I'm cutting and I just slice my finger. I don't even feel it. Especially kitchen knives, because they're a lot thinner than these big blades. A kitchen knife, it's thinner, so your blade has a potential to be way sharper. And I've cut myself with also a sharp kitchen knife. It can go in you and you're not going to feel it. You're really not going to feel it until a moment later. The only time I realized that was when I was actually bleeding. I was sitting there bleeding. I was like, why am I bleeding? So I washed it off and I was like, oh, I cut myself. So again, a sharp knife, it leaves a cleaner cut, cleaner edge. Your body can heal better when it's clean, and it's just a little better. I mean, that's all there is to it. Alrighty, I got a few more knives here. And this one right here is a kitchen knife. Well, it's a small kitchen knife, it's a steak knife. And some characteristics about this one is the blade, as you see, is very thin, so they have potential to be pretty sharp. Because the thinner the blade, generally speaking, the sharper the knife will be, or has the potential to be. Because all cutting is separating two objects, or separating one object into two pieces, basically. And a thinner blade, for example, on a piece of meat, will cut through it way better than, say, a thicker blade like that hunting knife over there, or these throwing knives. And also these bigger kitchen knives, even though they're so much bigger, they're not really thicker than a steak knife. They just have more meat to them in the back, and then the blade tapers as it goes down, and it tapers as it also goes down this way. So the thinnest point, of course, is going to be somewhere up here on the edge, and the thicker points are going to be usually along this spine to where it hits almost to this point right here into the handle. So sharpen one of these bad boys. These I actually do need to sharpen because they're kind of sharp, but they get used regularly, so they need sharpen. So same concept here, except you can lighten the angle up a little bit, make it about a 15 to 20 degree angle instead of 20 to 25, and it's just going to sharpen the blade in the same way, just back and forth until your knife gets sharp. And you can test it by running your fingernail across it or your fingers, but be careful because it can cut you. I'm going to speed this up for you again, so here we go. Alright, here's our last knife. It's a fillet knife. And the thing about fillet knives is they're really thin, like kitchen knives. They're thin, but they're also bendy. So when you sharpen them, they bend, obviously. So just hold some force into that bend to make it bend against the stone, so it rubs and bends and gets that whole blade surface in contact with the sharpening area. And this one's also sharp, so I'm not going to take too much time with it. How's that? Whatever. Alright, well, that's it today. If you like the video, like. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe because it helps a lot with our channel. And check out our Instagram page. I'll post it up here and in the description. And yeah, have a wonderful day.